The Rogers Center scoreboard doesn't lie, and neither does the StatCast data on Dalton Varsho's bat right now. Let's start with the tape, because that's where this entire trade conversation begins and ends. A .691 OPS through 96 games is not what the Toronto Blue Jays signed up for when they extended this guy back in 2023. We're talking about a hitter who posted a .833 OPS with 20 home runs in just 248 at-bats last season. And now he's sitting at 7 bombs in 324 at-bats this year. That's a cratering exit velocity trend, a drop in barrel percentage, and frankly, a lineup spot that John Schneider has had to shuffle constantly because the production simply isn't matching the defensive value. And that defensive value is real. Nobody's disputing that. Varsho is a legitimate Gold Glove center fielder, the kind of range and jump combination that saves runs every single week. But here's the brutal truth of where the Blue Jays sit on July 31st. They're in last place in the AL East, 5.5 games back of a wild card spot, and a glove-first outfielder on an expiring contract with a sub-.700 OPS is not the profile of a player a last-place team needs to be paying down the stretch. This is a sell high on defense, sell low on offense situation, and David Schoenfield's report connecting Varsho to the Arizona Diamondbacks makes a ton of sense when you dig into the roster construction on both sides. Let's talk about why Arizona fits. The Diamondbacks have started 4 different players in center field just in the month of July. That is not a stable situation for a team that has actually played itself into wild card position in the National League. When you're contending and you've got a revolving door in center, that's a front office problem that gets solved at the deadline, not in October. Varsho spent his first 3 big league seasons in a Diamondbacks uniform before the December 2022 blockbuster that sent him to Toronto in exchange for Gabriel Moreno, and Lord Gurriel Jr. Arizona knows exactly what they'd be getting here. They don't need a scouting report. They live with this guy in their clubhouse for 3 years. That familiarity accelerates trade talks in July when nobody has time to do a deep dive on makeup and clubhouse fit. Now let's shift into the payroll and competitive balance tax mechanics, because this is where it gets interesting from a front office perspective. Varsho is in the final guaranteed year of his contract, which means Toronto isn't just moving a player. They're moving a chunk of 2026 payroll obligation off the books at a moment when the front office desperately needs flexibility. Ross Atkins and the Blue Jays front office have been dancing right around the luxury tax threshold for multiple seasons now, largely because of the long-term commitments to Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Bo Bichette's arbitration escalation, and the money already locked into rotation with Jose Barrios and Kevin Gausman. Every dollar of Varsho's remaining salary that gets shipped to Arizona is $1 of CBT relief and $1 of future payroll flexibility for either an extension push or a 2027 free agency splash. This is not a rebuild. Let's be clear about that distinction. This is a repositioning trade. If Toronto moves Varsho, it's not because they're waving the white flag on the next 2 or 3 years. It's because you don't carry an underperforming, defense-only bat at a premium position into a season where you're already fighting from behind in the standings. You flip that asset while a contender still values a glove, and you reallocate the return toward pitching depth or a controllable bat that fits the competitive window better. So what does a return look like? Based on Arizona's stated need, a hitter and a starting pitcher. According to Schoenfield's reporting, this likely isn't a blockbuster headline return. Varsho, as a rental with a depressed offensive season, isn't commanding a top 100 prospect by himself. Realistically, Toronto is looking at a mid-rotation arm depth piece or a controllable bullpen power arm, something that immediately plugs into the 2026 to 27 pitching mix behind Barrios and Gausman, possibly paired with a lower-tier position player prospect who profiles as organizational MLB depth rather than a headline addition. Don't expect a Corbin Carroll-type name to walk back the other way. This is a depth-for-depth swap dressed up as a Gold Glove outfielder headline. Now here's where it gets real complicated for John Schneider's line of construction and depth chart. If Varsho is dealt, who plays center field at the Rogers Center for the rest of the season? George Springer has been logging more corner outfield reps as he manages his workload, and shifting him back to center full-time isn't really the long-term answer at this stage of his career, given the wear and tear concerns. That means Toronto's internal center field depth chart gets tested immediately. Names like Alan Roden and even some upper-level AAA Buffalo outfield options become part of conversation. And that's where scouts start connecting dots to the system. It's not a seamless transition defensively. You're trading a gold glove center fielder for a downgrade in the field, full stop. But this is the exact trade-off you accept when you prioritize batting order production and roster flexibility over a glove that isn't hitting enough to justify a lineup spot in a lost season. Let's talk about the batting order ripple effect here too, because losing Varsho changes more than just a ninth defensive position. It changes the bottom of the order construction. Varsho, even in a down year, provided some thump from the 7 or 8 hole that gave opposing pitchers something to think about before they got to the bottom of the lineup. Removing him means Schneider has to lean even harder on the Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Bo Bichette combination at the top to carry the offensive weight, while depth bats get auditioned in the back third of the order for the stretch run. This is exactly the kind of transaction that reshapes September call-up strategy. Expect Toronto to use the final 2 months to get real evaluation reps on younger outfield options now that there's an obvious opening. From Arizona's side, slotting Varsho into center field solves an immediate defensive stability problem without requiring them to overpay in the box score department. He's not walking into the desert and turning the Diamondbacks into World Series favorites. Schoenfield made that point directly, and it's accurate. But below average bat with elite glove work is still a net positive WAR contributor on a contending roster that's been bleeding outs in center field all July. Arizona gets stability. Toronto gets long-term financial flexibility and immediate pitching depth. And both front offices walk away from this one satisfied with the value exchange, even if it doesn't dominate national headlines. The bigger story here, though, is what this move signals about where the Blue Jays organization actually stands heading into the final week before the deadline. Moving a homegrown feeling piece like Varsho, even though he was technically acquired via trade, sends a clear message to the Blue Jays nation that ownership and the front office are prioritizing 2027 sustainability over forcing a fringe playoff, pushing a season that's already gotten away from them in the AL East standings. It's not a fun pill to swallow for fans who remember the Gold Glove highlights and the postseason moments, but from a pure roster building and competitive balance tax management standpoint, this is exactly the kind of value recognition trade that separates disciplined front offices from desperate ones. Keep this tab open, because deadline season moves fast, and if Varsho does end up wearing Diamondbacks red and black again, you're going to want a full breakdown of exactly what Toronto gets back in return. Drop your prediction on the return package in the comments. Pitching prospect, MLB bat, or a straight salary dump. And let's see who calls it correctly once the deal actually gets announced. If you want every single Blue Jays trade deadline update covered with this level of breakdown, make sure you're subscribed and you've got notifications turned on. Because between now and the deadline, this roster could look completely different by the time next week rolls around.